Thank you. I guess we can get started. We'll call it to order, and could we all rise for the pledge?
I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Fryrick?
Here.
Mr. Posnell?
Here.
Mr. Robinson?
Here.
Mr. Sanders?
Here.
Mr. Scalette?
Here.
Mrs. Schrader?
Here.
Mr. Sears?
Here.
Mr. Sullivan?
Here.
Mr. Tillman?
Here.
9 members present.
Okay, thank you. A reminder to please mute yourself unless speaking directly to the group. And this is our opportunity for public comment, if we could screen them. Everybody had time?
I have one more for you. Hold on.
Okay, thanks.
Wendy, did you refresh?
Okay, everybody had time?
Is there no name attached to the third comment?
It's Brian Platt. If she refreshes again, it's there. I was trying to rush to get that in.
That's fine. I just wanted to make sure we weren't, another anonymous message.
No, that is not the case. I apologize.
No problem. Thank you.
And I'd like to thank everybody for the public comments. As a note, we really appreciate them. It's how we get to communicate and get the feedback from the community. The board, however, will never respond to anonymous comments. I just thought I would mention that. And with that, you have a link here to the minutes of the regular monthly meeting of February 22nd. If there are no changes, I would offer them to be approved as submitted. Hearing none, I think they can be approved. The board negotiating committee met in virtual meeting format on February 24th of 2021 as permitted by Section 707 of the Sunshine Act, and no official action was taken. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Williams.
Good evening, everyone. We have a handful of things to talk about tonight in the superintendent's report, the first of which is a vaccination update for staff members. The Commonwealth has been working with the National Guard and another organization to provide vaccinations to educators via the intermediate units. For us, that's intermediate unit 12 out of New Oxford. We have been allotted 151 doses of the vaccine for York Suburban staff and subcontractors like food services folks and the transportation folks. And some substitute teachers are also taking advantage of that. And we submitted those 151 names today at noon. And those 151 people should be getting a link to a registration where they can sign up for vaccines. Our allotted day is scheduled for this Sunday. So this Sunday, we should get the the majority of those who wanted a vaccine in the first wave. We still have, I think, about 72 staff members who still would like the vaccine, and they will be in wave 2. So this first wave will take care of all of our special education staffers, our English language learner staffers, because those are the ones that we had to prioritize first. And then we start from the youngest, the teachers of the youngest learners all the way up to the oldest learners. And what that does is that gets our whole elementary staff vaccinated that wants the vaccine, and even extends into our middle school staff. So our middle school staffers who wanted the vaccine will have an opportunity to get that vaccine on Sunday. So that's the update on that topic, which leads me to the next topic, which is learning mode for the middle school. We're not asking you to vote on this tonight, but I want to make you aware that I will be recommending, as long as the vaccines work out the way they're supposed to work out, be recommending to the board to approve the 4-day-a-week learning for middle school students, starting probably March 29th. That will probably be the first day we're recommending to start that. That's a Monday. So that's what the recommendation will likely be, as long as the vaccination program goes off as planned. And I'll entertain any questions on that topic right now, either the vaccines or the learning mode.
Yeah, Dr. Williams, you had 151 sign up and 72 in the waiting. How many, remind me again, how many employees are there in the district that are eligible, or did you offer the vaccine to?
We offered it to all of them, the number of which it's hard for me to know for sure, because it also went to transportation, also went to food services. So we had, I think, 290 some responses, I believe. And we also have people who've already obtained the vaccine via other mechanisms. And a lot of the people who responded to the survey said, I declined because I already got the vaccine in another way, or because I don't wish to have the vaccine. So we had some of all of those things. So we've got 151 who are getting it in the first wave, and I think the number's 72 on the wait list for wave 2.
Okay, so how many responded positively out of the total employment of the district?
That I do not know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Ballpark, how many declined it?
Declined it for what reason? Because they don't want to
Either
get.
they got it or just declined it. I'm curious, because it's a common theme that we need the vaccination out there, and I know you're pushing it, and I know that we're trying to make it as available as possible. But I'm just curious to know the percentages, okay? Because I'd asked last meeting, was there a survey done of those that would or would not take it? I just would like to know, has that similar survey been done? And are our employees are the majority of them raising their hand saying they want to take it, or have already gotten it?
The majority are saying they want to take it. The exact number of those who decline, and I want to make sure we're talking about decline because they don't want a vaccine, period.
Yes.
Right. Because some have declined because they got it through other means.
Okay.
Kathy, do you have a number on that from that survey?
Total decline with both who have received it and who chose not to receive it is 81. I can split them out of who just declined based on of not wanting it.
So some of those 81 are getting it through another means.
Okay. Okay, so it's safe to assume that the rest of the people that were asked, the staff that were asked outside of the 81, want to receive the vaccine, correct?
Well, some of those 81 do want to receive the vaccine. They got it through some other means.
But putting them aside, it's every other person has responded in the affirmative that they want to receive it.
They weren't required to respond to the survey. But the vast majority did.
Okay, that's kind of what I'm getting at here. We're trying to reopen the schools. We're trying to understand what the staff is saying about their willingness to get the vaccine. Our parents would like to know that information. I'm not asking for confidential information. I'm just asking what is the vibe for people wanting to get the vaccine?
I'd say it's pretty strong. I can't give you percentages, but here's how I feel about it.
Okay.
The vaccine is available, and we made it as available as we possibly can. We've done everything we can to get people access to it.
Yep.
If people choose not to get it, that is a decision they have made.
Totally understand. I look, you've like gone above and beyond to try and get the vaccine in front of people. I just want to make sure that we're doing everything we can, because I don't want that as some type of pushback from any of our labor groups, that we haven't done as much as possible to make sure that they have access to it.
In my mind, I'm not anticipating pushback if they're choosing not to get it.
Okay, cool.
And
Thank you.
If they do push back, they push back. We're forging ahead.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Other questions?
So wave 2 would be.
They claim within the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, if the creek don't rise, folks will be getting their shots a couple of days before the planned return. Whereas a bigger chunk of folks in wave 1 will probably have a fairly significant immunity at 2 weeks.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the only building left to open at that point, because remember, the vaccine will cover the vast majority of those who wanted up to 8th grade. It's the high school now that we have to be concerned about getting vaccines for them in wave 2 before we consider opening that up. Any other questions about that? Okay. What I'd like to do then is I'd like to move on to the realignment pause and update. Okay. Well, we've been talking about realignment. It's been a hot topic lately, and we have decided to put a pause on the realignment concept, but I wanted to lay out for everyone some, answer some questions that have been asked, and there'll be plenty of other opportunities to discuss these topics, and we'll get to that later on. But I want to give you an overview of some information related to realignment and how that can make us more thorough and efficient. Thorough and efficient is a language in the PA school code. The legislature is to provide a thorough and efficient educational system for K-12 students, and therefore boards are supposed to supply a thorough and efficient education as well for its students. So there are two general outcomes. One is to improve the instructional opportunities through realignment, and I listed a few things there related to that. We're looking for consistency in instruction. When you have the same grade taught in multiple buildings, there's no guarantee that the delivery of instruction is going to be as prescribed in the curriculum manuals. And also, we want to assure the most effective access to all the support services. The best way to provide access to those support services is to consolidate where the needs are for those services. And we also want to make sure we're being equitable with all of our resources. The other general outcome is to improve efficiencies, and by improving efficiencies, you're decreasing costs. And what that allows us to do is to better manage class sizes and lower building operational costs and lower administrative costs and lower support service costs. Now, some people want to talk about how we're only doing this for money. And there is some element of truth to that, but we need the money to be able to educate students in the way we wish to educate them. So let's talk about the first outcome, the improved instructional opportunities. We'll talk about some regular education things and some special education things related to improving instructional opportunities. So for regular education, here are a listing of some advantages that we would have if we realigned grade levels into fewer buildings. There's a misconception that by doing so, we're going to increase class sizes. That's not true. In fact, this is the only way we can honor class size guidelines going forward. We will not have the resources needed to add teaching staff as quickly if we do not realign. And this will also allow us the opportunity to provide equitable services across the district to all students in the district. And as I mentioned earlier, consistency of delivered instruction and some other things listed there for as advantages. One of the things that we haven't talked about to date is if we were truly realigned K-12 across the district, we would never have a need to redistrict students again if population shifts in the community. So for example, if we end up with more residences on the east side, we would have to probably shift the boundaries between the elementaries somewhere to accommodate for that growth. And the same is true as if the population increases on the west side. The conventional wisdom is that the population is going to only increase on the west side. That simply is not true, as there are potential residential apartment complexes that are being developed or are in the plans of being developed on the east side of the district as well. So it's hard to say where the population growth is going to be, but if we are truly realigned, we don't have to worry about redistricting to change the boundaries between elementary schools. There are disadvantages. What's one thing that's true of any kind of realignment is that it's different than whatever the current alignment would be at the time. And that's a change that people are not comfortable with. And there are also some other disadvantages depending on how the realignment is done. For example, there will be longer bus rides for some students. And depending on how the realignment is done, we could end up with more transitions between buildings than we have now. For example, the alignment that was on the table recently was to consolidate into 3 buildings with 2 grades in each building. That would increase the number of transitions from one building to another, from what we have now to what we would have in that situation. Now let's talk about special education for a few minutes, the advantages and disadvantages of that. Right now, if we are transporting students to another building for special education services. So if we didn't have to do that, if we had students in their home buildings for special education services, it would promote the least restrictive environment that's written into law. We're not in violation of LRE, but we're always looking to find the best LRE we possibly can. And having grades realigned in the buildings would be a way to do that. We also have the opportunity to bring back some intensive learning support and emotional support students that we're currently sending out of district because we can't staff buildings the way we'd want to in those situations, the way we're currently structured. So we'd be able to, we'd see an opportunity to bring students back to us to educate them as opposed to contracting with the IU or some other service to provide those services. The economy of scale for special ed will work well in 3 grades per building as opposed to 2 grades per building, and I'll show you the numbers on that in a few minutes. There are opportunities for more efficient, flexible grouping within special education. Right now, we're not servicing all students in the best way we possibly can because of the circumstances of how the buildings are laid out for special education. It also allows us to target related services like psychological services and those kinds of things more readily if we were realigned. Now, disadvantage is that not all realignments are the same for special education. While we see great benefits for regular ed, it's not always the case for special education. There's some additional considerations for realignment. You've got economically disadvantaged, English language learners, special education gifted, foster care, homeless categories on the 2 sides of the district. You can see there are differences here and there. A couple things I'd like to point out. Special education on the west side is higher than the east side because we are transporting some special education students to the west side to receive their services. You can also notice something that kind of caught me as a surprise. I'm not sure why, it's just the way it is. But if you look at the east side male and female split, you expect somewhere around 50%, 50%. But for some reason, we have more males on the east side than females by what I see as a fairly wide margin. It's just the way it is. Additional considerations as far as ethnicity is concerned, we have differences between east side and west side there as well. All right, outcome 2, improve efficiencies and thereby decreasing costs. So here's the expected enrollment for 2021-22 for next school year in the configuration we currently have now and that we will have this coming year because we're not changing that for this coming year. In this scenario, on the top line, you can see what the class size guideline is on the max side for 20 students between in kindergarten, first and second grade, 22 in third grade, and 25 in fourth and fifth grade. And you can see in the students line, the number of students in those buildings. And then in the classrooms line, you can see the number of classrooms needed to house that number of students with those class size guidelines. And you could see the class sizes for each of those grades in each of those buildings. And the last row is the available seats at the start of the year. Now, it's important to keep in mind that the kindergarten numbers, of course, we don't have kindergarten registration yet. And so we're prepping for 230 new kindergartners next year. Normally we prep for about 220, but our numbers are really low this year. And we suspect, and we don't know this for sure yet, we suspect that maybe some students, some parents who had the option we're considering whether or not to send their child to kindergarten this school year may have decided not to because of the pandemic. So we expect that maybe the kindergarten numbers will be higher than typical for next year. So that's why we have those numbers where they are. The other numbers are rolled over from this year to next. So you can see in this whole scenario, we will be in need of 64 classroom teachers. This doesn't cover special ed, this doesn't cover other services. This is just regular ed classroom teachers. So the number for that is 64, okay? So let's take a look at what this would have looked like if we were realigned for next year using those very same numbers and those very same class size guidelines. You can see that if we had 3 buildings, a K1, a 2-3, a 4-5, you can see that the requirements we would need 4 less classroom teachers to have similar class sizes in a realigned configuration with 3 buildings having 2 grades in each of them. So there's a savings of 4 teachers. Now, how we would have gotten there, it would have been through attrition, not through furloughs or any other kind of work displacement, simply through attrition, retirements and resignations and things like that. Now, what if enrollment increased or decreased? What would that do to the numbers? Well, that's a legitimate question. And so we have some data from all the way back to 2004, 2005. And if you average all those years out, the average increase year to year is 100.7%. So less than 1% increase year to year. The highest percentage was 105.6. I don't recall the year on that right now. And the lowest was about 96%. So we can take a look at what those numbers look like with those different percents. And I'll hop out to a spreadsheet here that I'm hoping that you can still see the screen. Now, this is a Google sheet that I use to for the numbers to prepare them for tonight. And this sheet's out there that anybody can view. Anybody can copy to their own Google space or download it as an Excel spreadsheet and do whatever they want to it to play with the numbers. You're not gonna be able to do anything to my sheet live because it's read only for everybody right now. But if we go to the second tab that I have here on the grow decline, right now I have all these numbers set for 100%. In other words, no growth, no decline year to year. So those are the numbers. Again, you can see 64 teachers under the traditional way and 60 in the consolidated way for the first year. Second year, we need 63 teachers not realigned and 59 teachers realigned. And in the third year, it's again a difference of 3 teachers. So year 1, difference of 4 teachers, year 2, difference of 4 teachers, year 3, difference of 3 teachers. Now, if we shift this number from 100%, status quo, down to the low end was 96% over the last 15 years or so. So if I plug 96% in there, you can see what that does to everything going forward. So in year 1, the difference is 3 teachers. In year 2, the difference is 2 teachers. And in year 3, the difference is 6 teachers. So you can see, no matter how you slice it, it's always fewer teachers needed for the same or similar class sizes if you're realigned. Now let me change this to, I think the highest one was about 105%. So if we do 105% over that time, we can see that in year 1, there's only a difference of 1 teacher. In year 2, it's a difference of 4 teachers. And in year 3, it's a difference of 5 teachers. So it really doesn't matter what the growth number or the decline number is. No matter how you slice it, you're going to need the same number of teachers from fewer teachers from year to year. So how does economy of scale work? Economy of scale works really well for regular ed, but now we have to think about how economy of scale works for special education. And we'll start with autistic support classrooms. Right now we have 4 autistic support classrooms in the elementary level. And if we were to realign into 3 buildings with 2 grades in each building, you can see that the number of autistic support teachers and related paraprofessionals would actually increase from 4 to 6. Now you're probably wondering, like I did, well, how can that possibly be? Well, the answer to that is that for special education purposes, specifically, especially for autistic support, we've been functioning under a realigned paradigm because we transport our autistic support students to the building where they need to be educated. So in essence, we're already treating that segment of the population in a realigned way. So if we were to realign into 3 buildings, our costs for special education would actually increase pretty dramatically by adding those 2 autistic support classrooms. Now, if we look at realigning into 2 buildings of 3 grades in each building, you can see now we're at the same number of autistic support teachers. We'd need 4 in that scenario. So that nothing changes as long as we realign into buildings that have 3 grades in them. Now let's take a look at learning support and emotional support. Right now we have 7 of those teachers in the elementary level. And in a situation where we would have realigned into 3 buildings of 2 grades in each building, you can see the numbers there. You can see that it really doesn't help that much. It would be 1 less teacher, but we really see some savings in a situation where we would be realigned into 3 grades in a building. Now, not only do the numbers play out well here, but we can also more effectively target special education services, particularly in grades 3, 4, and 5. Because right now we're educating a lot of learning support and emotional support students in the same room at the same time. By realigning, we'd have the opportunity to provide better services to students because we could focus some rooms on just emotional support and some rooms on just learning support. Whereas what we're doing now, we have a combination of both in one room at the same time. So we can provide better services this way. So there are other efficiencies too that we would realize. Our administrative staff would not need to be as large as it is right now. We'd be able to reduce a staff member per building. Support staff, meaning clerical and custodial, those costs would decrease too because we wouldn't need as many people in that scenario. And utility costs, of course, would decline. How much? It's hard to say because if we're going to mothball a building, we're still going to need to maintain some utilities in that building. Maintenance costs could also decline too, but if we're mothballing a building, we still have to cut grass and things like that. So it's hard to say how much those things would decline, but they probably would not be as expensive as they are right now. that led me to ask Mrs. Irwine to do a little research, and she did that for me, and she looked up buildings we've had in the past. And it turns out we kind of have a history of realignment that I really wasn't aware of. Some of you may have been aware of that, but I wasn't as aware of it. There's pictures of old buildings that we no longer use and are in the district. And I think many of them are still standing. So here's a listing with the most recently closed building at the top of the list. And there's other buildings in the list that go back to 73. Those buildings are no longer used at York Suburban, and some of them we don't own any of them that are in that list right now. So Mrs. Irwine developed a little list of grade realignment changes over a longer history than this, but I'm just showing you from 1983 on. And you can see that there are many years that we had some grade level realignments. And if you look at the first column on the right, 1983-84, you can see that Valley View Elementary was closed. The building we currently use now was closed at one time. And so was the old Yorkshire Elementary was closed in 83-84. And things were realigned to K5, and the middle school took on grade 6, where it had, I think prior it had been just grade 7 and 8. And you can see that about 5 years later, there was another realignment. T means transition, a transition classroom, which is kind of like between kindergarten and first grade. And you can see Valley View was a kindergarten building in 89-90 and stayed that way for a few years. And then in 92, first grade was added to it, and East York's configuration changed to grades 2 to 5. And then a few other little changes. And then if you look at 2011-12, which is roughly 10 years ago, was when the current alignment was established. So that's the history, the recent history of realignment in the district. So we are looking to continue the tradition that York Suburban has had as being thorough and efficient. We need to figure out the best way to do that yet. But we do need to do something to remain fiscally sound for the time going forward. So the next steps, the Academic Standards and Curriculum Committee will have a subcommittee of stakeholders that'll generate a recommendation, and they will do their work led by Dr. Krauser between April 2021 and September 2021. And then in September, that subcommittee will issue its report to the full board, and the board will have a few months to think it over. And in November of 2021, the board will act on the recommendation produced by the stakeholder subcommittee of the Academic Standards and Curriculum Committee. And that is our plan going forward. And at this time, I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Dr. Williams, in looking at the, especially the historic profile or historical profile, and being married to somebody who attended a couple of the buildings that you showed us, would it be safe to say that using realignment to respond to the crises that the district has faced in the past is very much part of the suburban way? Is that a fair characterization?
I was not here then, but I would venture a guess that it would be a fair statement.
Well, I'm just going on the premise of I'm married to somebody who is a suburban grad, went there throughout her school career. She went to Yorkshire, went to Mount Rose, went back to Yorkshire. As you might imagine, she took several bus rides throughout her school career. I asked her about the influence of the transit. She didn't have any idea what I was talking about. I'm just taking into account some of the more poignant comments that we received from public comment. It just strikes me that children may be less prone to be preoccupied with bus rides than adults. Is that? I'm sure there are research studies to cover all that, but was just wondering if that would be something that really we're making too much of.
Well, I will say this. I think children are more resilient than we often give them credit for. And as a youngster, I rode a bus for a fairly long time, 45 minutes, 50 minutes. And to me at that time, it was just the way it was. I don't, until recently, I didn't think much of it. And I reflect back on that, and that's just the way it was in my experience. And people would argue that maybe that's the way why I am the way I am right now. I don't know, but I think children are more resilient than we give them credit for.
Well, thank you. I think that's what I was driving at, but I just wasn't able to say it as clearly as you. Thank you.
That's very kind of you.
Dr. Williams, looking at your realignment plan, and I appreciate all the detail that you put in there. So, and we're going to hear from Mr. Chuli about the budget update, and I hope we go through kind of the projections through the next 3 to 4 years. What other levers would we have to pull if we didn't engage in a realignment discussion, hypothetically speaking?
Personnel consists of 70% of our budget. It's really the only area that we can control spending because not only are we paying salaries, but we're also paying upwards of 35–40% of that salary into a retirement system and other ancillary costs for that. So it's not just a person's salary that we would have to be concerned about. It's much more than that. And with it, that makes up 70% of our budget. I mean, you can only cut so many paper clips, and the way to become solvent going forward is to more efficiently use staff. That is our only option going forward to try to remain financially solvent.
So this would be a way to maintain our educational quality as high as we can, with the acknowledgement that we have to address our structural deficit, of which most is labor cost, correct? Is that a good way to look at your plan?
It's probably the only way to look at it.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Dr. Williams, from your presentation, it appears the best, most efficient consolidation of grades is to have 3 grades in a building. I'm right so far? Okay. So do we have space currently in our buildings to do that? We do not.
We do not. So,
oh, excuse me, go ahead.
So we have some facilities needs that we have to address, no matter how you slice it. We have some issues that need to be explored and fixed. We have some systems that are 50, 60 years old that we're still using on a daily basis that can't hold up much longer. So we have some urgent facility needs. So we have the choice between doing nothing different with our alignment and throwing money into all of those buildings, or do something more efficient and figure out a way. And I don't know what the answer is yet, and I'm putting a lot of faith into the Academic Standards and Curriculum Committee, subcommittee, to be able to come up with a good plan to get us to a situation where we have 3 grades in a building.
So we'll have to add on, I mean, to cut to the chase, so to speak, we'll have to add on to 2 buildings in order to get this configuration that you're talking about?
That's one way to do it. There's also another way, and that would be to have a K to 3 building, and then a 4, 5, 6 building at the current middle school, and then a secondary campus.
Okay.
There's more than one way to do this.
Yeah. Okay. We have talked about that in the past. Okay.
Yeah, that's in fact that's in the conceptual framework document,
right?
And a few other documents that we've been talking about for the last couple of years. So I don't want to think there's only one way to do this.
Right.
The Academic Standards and Curriculum Committee is going to explore those options and figure out the best way forward.
Well, it's clearly thinking out of the box is what we've got to do to get there. I mean, that really is what it boils down to in my mind anyway.
Right, agreed.
And my last question is, remind me of the figure when we say it'll save us 2 teachers, it'll save us 3 teachers. What is the budget figure per teacher?
Well, for this coming budget, it's $118,000 for a new teacher, someone without experience. And as the years go on, that price is going to be higher unless there's a salary freeze for all those years, and no one expects that. So
and that puts it into perspective for me, and I needed to hear that again, because that really does put it into perspective. Thank you.
Oh, you're quite welcome.
Dr. Williams, one of the things that the group, as they begin studying, look at is options for potentially going back to LIU for some of our things that we're now taking on in-house. I mean, because we're taking on the more expensive things with that LIU could do. I don't know if there's a savings there or not.
Yeah, there is. We only take back classrooms where we believe we're going to have a savings, and to my knowledge, that opportunity is there for any service that we do with the IU, because not only are we paying for the service through the IU, because they're meeting payroll for the people that are in those classrooms, and there's also an additional fee tacked on to that. So we can almost always perform those services better in-house if we take them on and bring them back. And sometimes we can even generate some revenue in some of those situations. For example, if we bring back, and we have brought back autistic support classrooms, and if we have a seat or 2 available, we can quote unquote sell those seats to another school district who needs an autistic support student educated elsewhere. So
has that happened?
It has happened, yes. We actually have a West York student right now in one of our classrooms. So there are opportunities to generate some revenue that way. We would never do such a thing with the expectation that we would generate revenue. We would only do such a thing if we can save money by not generating the extra revenue. The extra revenue would be an added bonus.
Okay.
Dr. Williams,
Yes.
as this topic has generated an awful lot of feedback from our public, I would like to have a better understanding of how a subcommittee of our committee is going to function. Because quite honestly, there are too many meetings for our committees on my schedule to attend them all. And now we've created a subcommittee, and quite honestly, our committees are not publicly attended. So how are we going to make sure that that subcommittee receives all the feedback / criticism that it requires to receive over the next 6 months, so that we don't have the backlash that we had? I mean, this has to be a very, very, very open public process, or we will be beaten once again. And fair or not, you know, we need to make sure that doesn't happen. And we have time here. I think we've made a very good decision here. I appreciate the fact that after looking at that analysis and seeing what was going on with the special ed, that we took a step back, because we have to know the effects of everything. You know, one of the things, every time you guys talk about expanding the buildings, okay, if we're going to save 4 teachers at $118,000, how much money does that spend in debt service on new building expansion? And I forget the number. I asked it 2 years ago, but there's only so much money that gives us back. Now
400,000 for every 10 million.
Okay, so we can spend about 15.
How do I know that?
And I mean, so I'm saying that not because I want an answer. I want all of those costs to be part of this conversation because we need to know the whole picture. We need to know things like if we are able to farm things back to the LIU, or if we gain benefit from that. We need to see the entire balance sheet as we're doing this, because if it comes out that doesn't work, then we should stay the way we are. I know, just like you do, that we can't stay the way we are. Those salary costs we cannot overcome them. We can't charge enough taxes to overcome them. Even if we wanted to, we can't. And I'm sure that math, if we looked at what that breakdown is, what the increases are, what we are contractually obligated to increase our salaries in, what we are going to be obligated by PSERS every year to increase the retirement funds. If we did that math, I have a sneaking suspicion that our tax increase barely covers that, which leaves us no room. So, I mean, I understand where we're going to be, but we need to really be looking at those numbers as we go through this process, not just the warm fuzzy stuff, but the numbers. Every time we have a meeting of that subcommittee, there ought to be numbers in front of it and assigned to every decision or every thought that we're looking to evaluate. And I just want, like I said, I just want to understand what that process is. I don't understand how that's going to work, and I know our public is going to want to participate. So, thank you.
Yeah, and the subcommittee is not going to be just members of the Academic Standards Committee. It's going to be a stakeholder committee of various stakeholders. And I'll let Dr. Krauser explain a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably, maybe a better term would be kind of a working group. And I'll address two things, Mr. Toman. The first comment I do want to comment, I know that Dr. Williams was kind of echoing two components to the special ed compartment about the realizing of savings, one being that getting those students in a financial return is beneficial. And I think he alluded to it and maybe got cut off. The second part was, the other piece is they are our students, and we feel very confident we can educate them better when they are with us. And that's part of that process about returning students back from the LIU placements. But the working group conditions for the involvement is, as you said, critical that we have community involvement. So what it is involving is it's kind of a two-pronged approach. One being a general survey collection, data collection, but then also facilitated by a group of administrators. We're going to conduct a series of focus groups over time based on themes that are related to the realignment concept with an instructional programming. So that's curricularly related. It's socially related, it's equity related, those kinds of climate components about the structures of a school, et cetera. So those focus groups will be working and meeting over time in small groups of stakeholders ranging K to 12, where we get direct feedback from students and families from the community. Given a nice chunk of time that we have this data, we'll be able to run multiple focus groups to collect that kind of data as well as the general surveying data. We'll take that information, synthesize it with what we can find regarding current research, regarding alignment, instructional program for realigned schools, and then bring that back to the Academic Standards Committee for vetting and processing as we prepare that final recommendation.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up.
I will reiterate, if this is not an open public, I mean, I get you're bringing stakeholders in. Keep in mind, the stakeholders that participate in these things are the ones who have the time to place a commitment. I will hazard a guess that 90% of the overwhelming amount of comments we just got back were from working parents who do not have the time to make that commitment. I recognized a lot of those names. They have the time to write that letter. They do not have the time to sign up for repeated interaction with that committee. And while they are concerned, they will not do that. Will they come to a public meeting if we have it, or multiple public meetings if we have them? Yes. I understand what you're trying to do. I'm just cautioning you that if we do not have open public meetings along the way, maybe you do what you want to do, but you have to have opportunities for the general public to come in and state their concerns. If we don't have that, we're just setting ourselves up for a bad outcome here.
Agreed. And I think the timeline that was being shared was, as we produce that recommendation, exactly as you said, then comes that time for the feedback on the recommendations coming out of academic standards in a larger public sequence for board action. But yeah, point well taken, and we'll embed that into the process.
I'd like to speak to that as well. So thanks, Mike, for sharing that. Yeah, I question whether the Academic Standards Committee is the right umbrella here. It strikes me that a stakeholder group would be a stakeholder group of the whole board. But it sounds like much of this conversation will revolve around facilities. The charge of the Academic Standards Committee is quite narrow. So I'm not sure I understand the concept of having it be a subcommittee of the academic standards. It seems like it's now embedded in some committee that has a limited charge. But a stakeholder group has to look at this whole picture, which is not an academic standards and curriculum question. So I'm hearing this idea for the first time. So it strikes me that if there is going to be a stakeholder group, it would be housed within a larger body, not tucked within a one committee.
Well,
I don't believe that this is focused specifically on that committee. I think they called it that for lack of calling it something else. The entire discussion starts about curriculum and academic standards. The rest of it ties to that, but I don't see this as being really part of that committee.
Well, I guess that's what we're talking about. So that's what I'm interested in. Yeah, it strikes me that if a stakeholder group is being formed, it's a stakeholder group that's connected to the board, not to the Academic Standards Committee. I mean, the academic standards might have one narrow contribution to make having to do with academic standards and curriculum. But there's a recommendation that's going to have to be made about buildings and further items that the Academic Standards Committee won't be able to speak to.
I think this kind of goes back to the charge that we received from the Properties and Finance Committee, where they charged the Academic Standards and Curriculum Committee from the board when the adoption of the guiding principles came to fruition, that we make an academic recommendation regarding curriculum instruction that would best seat for an instructional alignment. It would then be the facilities and properties determine what is the best, I'll say, physical structure design to meet those needs. Our charge was to come up with what would be an instructional framework or a learning continuum K-12 that best meets the needs of our students. Then it would come back to the Property and Finance and the board as a whole to determine how does that fit into the complexities of the decisions regarding, as Dr. Williams mentioned, facilities that are aging, and I think as Lois Ann mentioned, you know, what are we doing with regards to, is this something that you add to, is something you add on, and then the Academic and Standards Committee can step back from that.
Yeah, in essence, I want programming to dictate facilities, not facilities to dictate programming. That in a nutshell is why it's in the Academic Standards Committee to bring stakeholders to the table. Stakeholders means everybody, students, parents, community members. Doesn't mean just people interested in curriculum and how the curriculum is implemented. So the stakeholder group is going to be comprised of people from all parts of the district, not just those interested only in academic standards. It's coming out of the Academic Standards Committee because I felt like that was the best place for it to come out of, as opposed to Property and Finance. I didn't want Property and Finance driving whatever it is that we would end up doing.
But the administration is going to be doing the convening, right?
Yes.
Okay. So this is really sort of like you guys have got a discovery process that you're going to engage in that is going to report out to academic standards as the relevant committee of jurisdiction,
right,
and probably make presentations to other committees along the way.
And the full board.
And the full board. Okay,
Yeah.
got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if I could just state to make sure my concern is stated clearly in terms of the structure, and maybe this is semantic and maybe this is not significant, but I'm directing this as much to you, John, you know, in terms of board structure. But if we're going to be talking about efficiencies, or if we're going to be talking about buildings. It strikes me that the stakeholder group would be a group of the board. So I mean, just sort of in the ordering of events, I just want to speak to Mike's concern that, you know, if there's sort of a narrow set of discussions that happen are reported out to academic standards that are bracketing certain issues, then we're not going to be making a recommendation about an overall plan. We're going to be making a recommendation about curriculum and standards, not about a plan overall. So if part of getting stakeholders together is to make a recommendation about an overall plan, an overall recommendation about what to do in the district, that's where my concern rises.
And see, I think that's backwards. The stakeholders we're discussing are community members, parents, and students, not the board. The board is the basis for this discussion. Once we've got this feedback across the community and we have a recommendation, then we can talk about outcomes, we can talk about facilities. I think Tim is correct that facilities should never drive a discussion about the well-being of the kids. We start with well-being of the kids, and then we figure out how to build it and pay for it. So I think the process is right. I think we want to be careful. This is not a board-driven think tank. This is a community-driven interaction, if that makes sense.
It does. These are things to clarify. I mean, the way Steve Sullivan put it, it's where is information going to be reported? So it's going to be first reported to academic standards. Is that the concept?
Right. So it's not like, sorry to interrupt, Steve, but it's not like academic standards is going to have to meet to have the members of the board for academic standards create a bunch of focus group instruments to be used with the public, right? The convener or the organizer, the driver of the discovery process is the administration. And you guys are going to be reporting. Yeah. I just needed to understand that from an ownership process, because I was going to offer to help in some way. And then I thought to myself, well, wait a minute, maybe you're not allowed to.
So write that down. You heard that.
Well, I'm always giving a darn when it's not my turn. But just to understand who's driving it, I'm assuming Dr. Krauser, with input from other people, will be putting the instruments together. We'll be putting the invitations out to the community to have folks come in. We'll be doing the calendaring. That's not going to be the job of the academic standards and curriculum to run that discovery process. They're going to get the report of the discovery process.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
Steve, that may not have helped you at all, but it helped me.
No, it did. This helps. But I'm making a separate point, which is it's conceivable that the academic standards might make a recommendation one way or the other on academic standards, and then it might go over to finance and they might have a different recommendation. That is, these are different committees that have different charges. That's the point I'm making.
Steve, listen, Joel,
I want to make sure it's recognized.
From a process standpoint, the point you just made there was, let's just say for the sake of discussion, the focus groups all come up with what they believe is the most ideal way to educate the kids. And this is the structure that's handed off for essentially another feasibility check or a gut check to say, can we even do this? A lot of us have that feeling right now. This is not the first time we've had this conversation. And tonight, for example, when Tim made his presentation, it was pretty clear what kind of classroom structure would optimize the cost of our faculty. That was the focus on it. Well, in order to implement that, you got to have a footprint of some kind that'll support it. And if it's determined that that footprint costs more money than is generated to cover the debt service, then you go back and you do it again, or you put the whole thing on pause again. But I think it makes good sense to have it driven by academic needs first. That's really what I think I'm hearing tonight. And then look at the financial, the construction piece, the timeline. I mean, we're not talking about something, if that was handed off, if that optimum structure was handed off to any committee or to the administration to work with, think about the timeline. This is not a finger snap that immediately reconfigures the district. So there's a transitional phase that also has to be taken into account. You know, obviously this is not simple, but I think we absolutely have to wrap it around academics and the well-being of our education program before we turn any of these other switches and levers to determine the feasibility, the cost, the timing, and so on. We need this start.
So I'm just going to say that it's all nice and rosy and rainbows and stuff for us to say that this is an academic issue, but we are having this discussion because of finances. And I mean, that is the problem. We wouldn't even be having this discussion if we didn't have
I don't know that that's
finances.
true,
I
Mark.
hope that's really not
We
true.
would not be having this discussion if there was not a financial issue.
First of all, there's always a financial issue.
If we did not have the
this is a
serious
long
issue we
term-
have right now. Let's not sugarcoat that part of it, guys. This is a very serious financial issue. Yes, we need to make sure our academics are covered in this. Neither one of these horses is driving this. You know, it is a overall issue for all of us. These separate committees we have don't function separately anyway. Every board member that can make those meetings has been making them in recent times. So we're meeting committee meetings with 9 board members there, if at all possible. This is a higher level. I agree with Steve. This is not an academic standards and curriculum issue. It's an academic standards and curriculum issue. It's a finance, it's a property issue. It is a personnel issue. It is all of the issues.
Of course it is.
But it
And-
has,
Got to start somewhere.
has to be led
Further,
from
we start with some
point.
kind of a financial profile and say, here, go squeeze the academic program into this. Let's do that.
Should be reported back to every one of the committees or just simply to the board.
And there will be reporting back to the full board. It's not going to be reporting back just to the Academic Standards Committee meeting. It's not going to be reporting back to any other committee. The task of the Academic Standards Committee is to have a stakeholder committee that reports back to the full board and involves community input. This isn't something that's going to be kept in the confines of the Academic Standards Committee. And in December, voila, well, here it is. It's not going to be like that. It's going to be an open process the whole way through with stakeholder involvement.
If I may, I think I concur with what Mike Toman's original statement was. You know, you've got to have this very open, very transparent. And the minute you start talking about stakeholder groups, I don't think you're going to have the kinds of conversations. And then which committee does it go back to? Maybe this is one of those things that you have these community meetings and then we talk about these things at planning meeting as a group of the whole, as opposed to putting it back into a particular committee to come out and make a recommendation. I don't know. But I have to agree with Mike Toman that I think we have to keep this as much out in the community. It's got a lot of facets. It's finance, it's academics, it's everything. And I just kind of like the idea that it's going to be much more out in the community and give and take with these people, as opposed to saying we're going to have focus groups and we're going to have 20 people here and 20 people there and things like that. Just a thought. I think this is bigger than it's ever been, and maybe we have to do it a little bit differently.
Well, while I think the entire community needs to be involved, I think you will never get to any real answers if you immediately go out to this broad group of people and start talking. You need input. I'd say let's get some focus groups, do some surveys, and then have these group meetings you're describing. But if you just open with group meetings, you're not going to get any information.
Okay, I'm willing to reverse that a little bit, but I think you do need, you know, the general community input is absolutely critical.
Yeah, and again, I don't think anybody is talking about conducting this discovery process within the calendaring footprint of that subcommittee. It's going to have its own schedule. It's going to have its own meetings. They're going to be
It will happen.
weekend days, however it makes the most sense to get, you know, probably get maybe 1 or 2 of the auditoriums involved with people spaced out, whatever it takes to get input from different sectors in the population.
Yes, it will act independently of the Academic Standards Committee, but the committee is being formed out of the Academic Standards Committee.
I think some of this is semantics. I mean, my thought is, I think the administration, has a vision of what they need, and if along the way it's our purview as a board to say, wait a minute, let's remember this or let's remember that, but give them, let's see really what they have in mind, rather than shooting it down before it even starts. I mean, there's more than one way to skin a cat, as they say.
If I might ask a question and build on the commentary of my good friend and colleague, Lois Ann Schrader, I think most of it's semantics. And the implication that we haven't been transparent, I don't buy that, because as I recall, before COVID changed life as we know it, we were trying to engage in transparency, especially with the community. We had community meetings that were poorly attended. And I'm just questioning whether or not we have the time to convene all of these committees and maximize transparency when the clock's ticking. I think we know what the problem is. And the question of whether or not the education and welfare of children is up for grabs, I find that inexplicable. Of course, that's what we're gunning for, first and foremost. That's never a question, is it? But are we going to really debate it when we're looking at the budget figures that we've seen these several past weeks? I just wonder if we're spinning our wheels again. Thank you.
Well, everybody else has had a chance. I'll chime in here as well. We have been open and transparent. And when I read the comments, I read them thoughtfully, but we had meetings in the cafeteria. We've had, every one of our meetings is public. And I will listen to complaints only so far, but the only solution I've heard has been a consolidation plan, which has shown any tangible financial impact to what we're doing here. I hope that what we get out of these sessions are solutions, because I've heard an awful lot of complaining and people don't like change, and I get it. And I don't want to consolidate the grades either. We have a pretty darn good school district here. But at the end of the day, the reason why we made a decision out of the Academic Standards Committee to move forward is because Ms. Ciuciulli ran the numbers for us at that 3% tax increase. It was a financially driven decision to start looking hard at our options. So whether you guys want to believe that or not, that is what moved us forward. We kept batting around the ball for so long and took a pause with COVID. I'm sorry, but I don't have a lot of tolerance for people that tell me we're not being transparent. And I don't have a lot of tolerance for people that aren't willing to go back and look at our minutes, because we have been. And I'm begging people, please, I get your concerns, I get your complaints, start coming up with solutions. There's a lot of real smart people in this district, and I hope that's what comes out of these groups that we're putting together. But if we're going to get together and just complain forward and not offer any solutions, then you know what? Keep the committee small, make a decision, and move forward. Anyway, that's all I got.
So we confused you enough, Dr. Williams? Do you have marching orders?
Yeah, we're going to continue down the path that we have been planning.
Thank you.
And we will present to you a solution that will help us financially and improve things academically. It's that simple. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our two administrators here tonight. I think Dr. Furman is here to present from East York, and Dr. Adams is here from the high school. We'll let Dr. Furman go first.
All right, thank you. Who would not want to follow that rousing debate, right? All right, folks, I'm going to share my screen with you here. And what I want to talk to you tonight is I want to follow up from the Personnel Committee because while I wasn't on the screen watching, I promise I was in the background. Whoops, sorry. I was in the background making dinner and watching. And so what I wanted to do is take my time tonight to help explain the thought process behind the elementary staffing requests, if you would. And I wanted to try to connect the dots between this forward instructional alignment, those guiding principles that have been approved. We've talked to you a lot about the professional development that we've started in the district last year with Heidi Hayes Jacobs visiting and now trying to rewrite our curriculum in an understanding by design format. And then of course, always being aware of the storm of budgetary concerns. And so in connecting those dots tonight, I'm going to build on some of the student academic needs that were mentioned earlier and try to, my focus is more on the urgency of reevaluating what we teach and how we assess it while living within the resources that we currently have. Basically, in looking at school once upon a time, we're trying to change the way how York Suburban plays the game of school. We have a really strong and rich history and foundation to build upon, but we fully recognize school shouldn't look like it did 100 years ago, 50 years ago, or even 10 years ago. And so with that in mind, we've really started asking ourselves, what is worth knowing in a 21st century curriculum? And so my question for you is, does anyone know what this little plastic tip at the end of that shoelace is called? Because what we want to do is we want to build on our students. We want to help them learn those enduring understandings, those essential learnings, those broad and abstract things that cut across multiple disciplines. We want to move beyond an education where students can just Google an answer. And by the way, the answer to my question, if you haven't Googled it already, is called an aglet. I asked Siri and she told me after a 5th grader asked me if I knew what that was last week. The other thing that we're trying to do is we rewrite our curriculum is we want to examine what is worth doing in a 21st century curriculum. And so we're trying to tear down the curriculum silos and separation that exists K-12, and we're trying to combine and we're trying to blend content areas. We want to push our students to create, to hypothesize. We want to push students to transfer and apply that knowledge. And if we continue to do what we've always done, that's really just, honestly, it's just not going to happen. And so, but we also recognize if we're going to push students to do all of these higher order doings and knowings, that we're going to have to provide more support to some of our students so that they can reach and access those important things. And so that being said, as much as we want to grow the brains of our students, it's equally as important that we are trying to grow their hearts as well. And who do we want our students to become as adults? And are we growing them into kind and compassionate human beings? Are we helping them become creative and critical producers? Are we empowering them to become activists? And these are all things that we are currently looking at and examining. And so school doesn't look like it did 10 years ago. Our building, I can speak for my building, we changed a lot in the past 5 years. And we understand the importance of movement for mental and physical health, as well as learning. We know that increased movement brings more oxygen and blood flow to the brain. And we know that that makes learning easier and it helps it stick for students. My teachers incorporate movement in transitions. They use it as a total participation technique. Instead of a thumbs up or a thumbs down, they'll have students do jumping jacks, students will plank, jog in place to show what they know. Extra recess is a top choice for students. That's their favorite reward when they meet their academic goals. I also want to show you a snippet here. This was from my board report last November. And it's just a segment of the video I showed you as I was updating building goals. Now, because of COVID, you won't see students dancing and having a hoedown in the classes right now. But what you're looking at here this is a transition in a 5th grade reading class last year, where the teacher and the students just basically needed a break to get up and get moving and to get some blood flowing there, if you will. Exit out of that, go back to that. And so with all of that being said, I knew there'd be a lot of healthy debate tonight, so I didn't want to take too much of your time. But we as administrators, we're caught in this same perfect storm that you are. And we are trying very hard to grow the hearts and the brains of each and every single one of our students. And we want it all. We want to have the specialists and the support staff on hand to help our students reach that curriculum. We wish that we could keep everything the exact same as it was, but we know that we can't do that. We know that we can't have it all currently. And so the staffing changes that we are recommending to you are the tough choices that we're willing to make in order to weather this current storm and ensure that all of our students have access to a 21st century curriculum. And so based on attending or virtually attending the personnel committee last Monday night, I just felt it was important to represent some of the other elementary principals and our thought process behind that so that I could connect the dots for you. I'm not sure if anyone has questions at this time or not.
Are there any questions for Dr. Furman? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Dr. Adams.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Before I get into the high school board report, it was nice that Dr. Furman was with us tonight so I could congratulate a colleague on having an article published in the Principal magazine. It was an outstanding article, so I'm sure that Dr. Ketterman or Dr. Krauser, Dr. Williams will share that out for everyone to read. It was an eye-opening, and it was actually some stuff that she'd share with us administratively, but it was nice to see it in print in a published magazine. So congratulations, Dr. Furman. Some of the things at the high school, I'm going to leave some. I saw Carly on here tonight, and although I didn't get a chance to connect with her today, I'm sure she'll have some great things to say about our musical from this past weekend. And some of the sporting activities that took place, as well as some of the arts that have been recognized, art students that have been recognized. So I'm going to start actually with some research and the process that some of our students go through, just because we hear often how well prepared our students are when they move on to college to do research papers. Now, some of the students that didn't feel they were very strong at York Suburban end up being tutors for other students when they're at college when it comes to the research process and writing papers. But just to kind of give you an overview, the 9th grade paper for all of our 9th graders is career related. The 10th grade is a controversial subject that they work through. 11th grade is a literary analysis that they do. In 12th grade, they do a combination between a literary analysis or a career related. But this, I'm going to highlight one from sophomore Hannah Kuhn, she did an outstanding job of, it was funding the arts program. And it was really interesting how she went and really researched the academic, the social skills, and the school climate, and how funding the arts can impact those 3 areas within a school. But then they also have to have the counter argument, which is really good for students to be able to experience. So not just presenting what they believe, they also have to make sure that they're presenting the other side. And then some of the students will even take the next step and do an action research project with that. So really cool process that all of our students at York Suburban get to experience. So most of them have gone through that process already this year and are probably pretty happy to be done with the research process. And I saw some seniors walking down the hall the other day going, research is over. I don't have to touch that anymore. So they're happy about that. Scheduling process, as we move to next year, we're already thinking next year, and we're a little bit, our timeline is a little off from years past just because of everything that we're dealing with this year. So the counselors will start getting information out to the students, and they're going to input things starting next week. And then the counselors will go to the middle school and work with the 8th grade team there to get those students scheduled. And then Dr. Ellis, who is a master scheduler, will take care of running the numbers and creating sections and doing all the fun stuff to get us up and ready for next year. With preparing schedules, can't have May at the high school without some AP exams and Keystone exams. Time where we're having challenges with instruction and getting kids online and doing the various things, and we're still going to be doing some pretty high stakes testing. It'd be great if we didn't necessarily have to do Keystones this year, those end of course exams, but right now we're still scheduled to run those at the end of May, and I'm sure our students will do well as they typically do. And then lastly, we're just all the changes that we've had this year. A lot of them actually are really good, and we've been reflecting on what we've been doing, and we'll continue to reflect on that to think some of the things we're doing, we're going to continue to do because it's what's best for kids at the high school. So with that, if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. And yes, the board, on Friday, I'll be sending you a link to Dr. Furman's article that was published in Principal Magazine, which is the publication of the Elementary School Administrators Organization. And that concludes the superintendent's report.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Julie.
Good evening. Under the business office report, we have 3 items for discussion and approval at the March 22nd meeting. The first is a renewal contract with Tomlinson Baumberger for the fertilizer, weed, and lawn treatments, and you'll see that it's only a $70 increase over the current contract year. Any questions on that renewal? Okay. The second item is approval of the agreement with the Meadows Psychiatric Center. They provide educational services for out-of-district students that are court placements, and the rate for that is $67 per day. The agreement is for the 21-22 school year and the 22-23 school year. The last item is approval for the board to authorize the business office to advertise and solicit proposal for banking services. And with the economic downturn due to COVID, we're looking to vet out some investment opportunities. Our interest rates are a bit low, and so we're trying to generate some revenue and seeking out those opportunities. So that is what that's for. Under the informational section, I have 2 items. First, a door project. As you recall from the last meeting, we approved the door project with the contingency that we would bring back a reduced project. And I've invited Mr. Wentz to provide us with an update on some options. Mr. Wentz?
Thank you, Kathy. Just out of curiosity, was the PDF shared with the board so they're aware of what? Okay. So what Kathy and Barry approached me with was a challenge of looking at the doors and looking at it from a holistic standpoint, saying what are the most priority doors on these projects and how can we break this apart in a way that gives the board the ability to make that decision as to what gets executed in this contract and what doesn't. So in doing that, the first step was to break out the 3 separate buildings. As you might remember, there are doors, the majority of them at East York Elementary. and that totals 86 doors in the original bid. There was one door at Indian Rock that was an exterior door by the kitchen, and there were 11 doors, all exterior, at the middle school. So what we did, we have asked the contractors to provide separate pricing for each one of those buildings. And then in addition to that, to the request about providing a quote for just the most essential doors, at East York, we have asked the contractors to provide a reduced scope for that. And what that reduced scope amounts to, a reduced scope of 34 doors, and that's what you see in the red. So it's the red highlighted ones in the schedule, but in general terms, what that amounts to are the exterior doors that take priority. Those are in individual red blocks, but the bulk of it is going to be the original East York building. And that's what you see as the red shaded area in the core of the building. I know there's been a lot of talk about what happens to these schools over the years. There's been a lot of talk about this process and deciding the realignment. Interestingly enough, the part that needs the most attention on the doors, that original part of the school, is also the part that's least likely to have any major change. So I don't think there's a ton of concern about throwing good money at a bad project. The contractors have not been able to pull together their final numbers for that. They were tasked with trying to get that to us at the end of last week. There has been a holdup on the general side, the general contractor side. They were unable to get the numbers. We do have the electrical numbers, but we really need to have both to present a full picture of this. That's the direction this is going. If anybody has a request to have this presented in a different way, this would be a great time to ask, so we can pull that together. I guess the one other item to note, I did talk to the door supplier today, and they noted that 2 weeks ago, the doors were shipping and they were being ordered and shipped within 6 to 8 weeks. Currently, now that they've gotten the updates from the factories, they are shipping 10 to 12 weeks, which means that's up to 3-month lead time. So a decision needs to be made on this soon, or we're going to be in a position, as it stands right now, if we can move forward, we'd be getting doors in July. If this delays any further, we're going to be in August, and it's going to be a school year season again.
Any questions on the door project? We should have final numbers for the board to consider at the next board meeting. Okay, thank you, Mr. Wentz. The second item under the informational section, Wendy, if you can pull up the PDF. It's just an update of what we've been working on as far as the budget is concerned. Mr. Sanders, I apologize, I do not have forecasts for you because we have not completed the vetting process for budget cuts. And we will have an update for you at the March 22nd meeting. Wendy, if you can make it a little larger, please. Thank you. At the February 22nd meeting, I presented a budget with a $1.6 million deficit. After that meeting, prior to that meeting, actually after February 8th, we were tasked with certain budget parameters or using budget parameters, and those are highlighted on the green on top. And we used a 1.9% tax increase, use of fund balance of $300,000. And one item that we did do outside of those parameters is to increase the tax collection from 96 to 97%. And that was simply done because given the fact that we have not seen an impact on our collection rating, we felt that it was safe to do so. Our normal tax collection is 97%. So since then, the administration has been working on different ideas. We're coming up with different ideas as far as cost reductions for the 21-22 budget. And so far, what we have for you is some salary and benefit changes that we have that included 2 positions that were requested from the high school that the administration did not grant. And then 1 elimination in the administration building, and that is proposed for the March 22nd vote. We also have some reductions to the IU transportation budget and pupil transportation. We reduced the Sunbelt contract slightly, and that is because we were able to hire an HRA internally. And we've made some changes to the custodial and facilities budget as well. So that brings our deficit down to 848,000, and we're still working on options moving forward. So that is where we stand with the 21-22 budget. Any questions?
Kathy, what are the changes to custodial facilities budget for almost $172,000?
We're making some recommendations to move the capital equipment from general fund to capital projects fund. And in looking at some utilities costs and trending from prior years, we reduced those items.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
So Kathy, does this reduction in salaries include all of the expected hires to July 1?
This includes everything that the board is being asked to vote for tonight, as well as for the 22nd meeting. So it would include the replacement of all the retirees.
So we're still 800,000 short.
That is correct. The majority of the cuts that we were able to make are one-time cuts.
So is the administration going to present something at Property and Finance to say how we close that $800,000 gap? You know, I'm reluctant to say let's go out and hire all these people if there's no money.
Understood. We're still working on options on how to reduce the deficit.
Okay. But this includes everything that's on the agenda tonight.
It does.
Okay.
I would also like to speak to what I raised at the last school board meeting. When you use the word parameters, board budget parameters 2821, that wasn't something that the board voted on. That was a point of conversation that John raised. And as the administration looks at what to do with this remaining deficit, I don't have the view that the board has identified 1.9 and use or non-use of fund balance as a fixed, unalterable point. So I would just like to express the view as these options are explored. That's not, those numbers I don't regard as untouchable parameters. It's up to the board to know what the cost and benefits are of making any adjustments in that respect. And I, for one, would like to understand what that is rather than seeing those numbers as always fixed going from this point forward.
Well, I think the thing was the administration asked for parameter. There it is. Mm-hmm. This can come through Property and Finance. And if you want to make a case for raising taxes higher, you're welcome to present it and see how it goes.
Well, I think to Steve's point, though, John, this is not a maximum tax increase or the tax increase.
That's correct. That's correct. This is just a ballpark to
jumping off
an idea where we are.
Get the conversation going.
Right.
See what sorts of measures are feasible to cure this deficit within the context of those parameters. It certainly didn't, we didn't say we approved a 1.9%.
Correct. Correct.
We say we approved any additional or restricted use of fund balance. But the administration has to have something upon which to base a budget, and this is what these are.
So at what point is that figure written in stone?
When we approve a budget.
So at what point do we say to the administration, we have an $850,000 deficit? What would it be if we raise taxes to the max? When do we say that?
I would say that discussion comes out of Property and Finance first and then goes to the board.
If I'm not misunderstanding Steve, I believe that speaks to his point. Am I getting close, Steve?
Yes, and to what Joel said as well. That is, That is, it's a process question of what happens at Property and Finance. That is, what are the range of ways to address this number 848? And I think it is appropriate at the Property and Finance meeting to learn about what are the ways in which fund balance would be used, or different tax rates, either greater or lower, depending on what board members think, and how that is a mechanism for dealing with that number. So I'm in agreement with all the remarks being made. I just want to make clear that from my point of view, at the Property and Finance meeting, it's all on the table in terms of the best way to look at that number.
And I would support that I think we need to see, it'd be nice on this chart if there was a column that showed us what the maximum tax increase does.
Wendy, I'm going to share my screen if you don't mind.
Thank you.
And I do apologize that if I came across that those parameters were set in stone, that was not my intention. When we had asked the board for parameters, it's so that to give us an idea of what we needed to do. And no, these numbers are not written in stone. But at every presentation, I've provided different tax scenarios. They range from 0 to the tax index at 3.6. And on the bottom here is the projected increase at each incremental percentage, and then what that total increase is over the 2021 school year. So you'll see that the 3.6 is $1.9 million. So if we were to increase taxes up to the index, it would be an additional $718,000 at 97% tax collection. We would still have a deficit. We would still have to use fund balance.
Do you have your fund balance spreadsheet in this handy?
I do not on this presentation. Okay. Let me see if I can pull it up. Okay.
We kind of threw you a curve there.
That's okay. When you want to find something quickly, it never happens.
Well, this kind of goes to the point that Ms. Chichuli can't work up. If you think about every potential convex combination of tax rate, use of fund balance, you know, she can't present 80 budget options to us each time we talk about this. So.
Okay, so the fund balance breakdown, as you can see, there are assigned categories: retirement expenditures at $2 million, capital projects at $500,000, debt service at 820,000. Healthcare is at 2.4. And we do plan on asking the board to move this amount out of general fund into the insurance fund to cover increases in claims. And if you had the opportunity to listen to the personnel committee meeting, you would have heard Toby say that we were slated to increase gross costs by 12% for the 21-22 school year. We have not increased insurance premiums for the 21-22 school year because we do have a healthy fund balance in this area. And so our thought was to ride out 21-22 in hopes that those claims, we don't see those claims rise to projections. We also have assigned fund balance for technology, special education, curriculum development, and then there is an assigned fund balance to cover the 2021 budget deficit. The unassigned fund balance is 4.8.
So Kathy, in the context of the information on the screen right now, 1.8 million roughly assigned for the budget deficit, and we're looking at an exhibit with about an $850,000 deficit. So are you saying there's 1.8 that has been set aside to cover that deficit?
No, this deficit is the current year's deficit.
I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. So that will be used. That will be gone.
We projected a $1.7 million deficit, so.
Yeah, so that will be utilized for that purpose. Okay.
So Kathy, which of these funds does the 300,000 PSERS come from? Is that the retirement expenditures?
It is.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay.
I think we beat you up enough.
All right, sounds good. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Ms. Bowen.
Hi, everyone. I hope that you're able to hear me today. So I have just a couple things to share. So first, I'd like to start off by saying thank you to everyone, especially Matt Marshall, for helping to make our winter sports seasons happen. The student athletes that were involved are greatly appreciative of all of the efforts put forth to make our seasons happen. So thank you. Also, as you may know, spring sports started today. And from what I've heard, our athletes are eager to get this season started as they missed out on it last year. Two of our students, Olivia Gibson and Faith Stewart, won a Juror's Choice and First Place award in this year's YCASC art competition. And the musical, like Dr. Adams mentioned, held a successful show of Singing in the Rain last weekend. Lastly, I'd like to share some results that I collected from a survey that I sent out to the student body a few weeks ago to gather some opinions on going back full time in high school. So if I could share my screen. Can everyone see that all right?
Yep, there it is.
All right. So as you can see, I collected almost 290 responses from the student body, and it was mainly a even amount of freshman through senior responses. I'll just scroll through the questions so you can get a quick glance of the results that I collected. All right, so as you could see there, the responses do vary. However, the majority, I would say, a little bit over 60% are saying that they would like to continue with the hybrid form of learning. So I hope that comes into consideration from the student body's perspective. So with that being said, and if anyone has any questions, that would conclude my report.
Carly, it's Mrs. Fryrick. I just want to tell you, you commented on the musical, and it was a phenomenal presentation, both at the middle school Friday a week ago, and then this past Friday, the high school. Both musicals were extremely well done. And under the challenging conditions, I think everyone that participated, from the directors down to the people manning the lights and things like that and backstage, is to be commended for their efforts. It's really outstanding. Thank you.
Yes, agreed. All right, that concludes my report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Committee reports, Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Posnell. The minutes of October 21 are provided. Item 2, consent agenda. You have before you the personnel report, which includes employment, extracurricular, and leave of absence. Would any board member like any of these items considered separately, or are there any questions on any of these items? If not, the chair moves approval of the below mentioned items.
Well, I think we need to have some perhaps separate discussion on item number 8A.
I think this is just A through C, right?
Oh,
Yes,
I'm
it
sorry.
is.
I apologize.
Not at all, Mrs. Schrader. We'll get to it.
So where do we
Anything else?
leave off? Did you ask for a,
Yes, I did.
So moved.
can we have
Is there
a second?
Second.
Thank you. Questions or comments? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 3, appointment of superintendent. The board will vote on the reappointment of Dr. Timothy P. Williams as superintendent of the York Suburban School District for a second term. Contract to be negotiated at a later time. May I have a motion?
Yes, so moved.
Second.
Thank you. And I would mention that this is a formality we have to do for the state. This has nothing to do with the terms of the contract or the agreement of the contract that will be negotiated. This is their intent to continue. So, questions?
John, if I could just add, it's been a tough year all the way around from top to bottom, and I, for one, would just like to thank Dr. Williams for successfully leading us through it and continuing to do so.
Okay, thank you. Other questions or comments? Then I think this can also be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Item 4, recommended board approval of the elimination of the administrative assistant to the human resources effective 8 March 2021. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Yeah, we
Oh,
do.
thank you. Questions, comments? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Item 5, recommended board approval of the creation and approval of the job description for the human resources specialist effective 8 March 2021. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Questions or comments? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Item 6, recommended board approval of the implementation of a district-operated autistic support program at the high school effective August 2021, and notification of the LIU regarding the district's intention for the transfer of entity. This classroom would include 1 teacher and 2 paraprofessionals. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Questions or comments?
This is Joel. What is the financial impact of this move, please?
Well, this would just be a transfer of professional contracted services to salary and benefits. The cost for the 1 teacher and the 2 paras my apologies, 1 second.
Well, you don't need the exact number, Kathy. Is it cost neutral?
There will be slight savings because the costs of hiring teachers and paraprofessional are lower with the district than they are with the IU. But of course, there are, costs with setting up the program. Yes. So there would be equipment, resources, and furniture. But that's a one-time cost.
Other questions? I think this can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Item 7, recommended board approval of the implementation of a district-operated intensive learning support program at the middle school effective August 2021. This classroom would include 1 teacher and 2 paraprofessionals. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Same question. What's the cost?
The cost is relatively the same, except that the cost of this teacher is slightly less than the transfer of entity. We assumed a master's step 2 level, which is $118,000, and then 2 paras is about $35,000 each. This is due to growth in the middle school for this class, and so it was a need.
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
Yeah, does this already appear in the budget?
It does.
So we already have 1 teacher in this program, and by approving this tonight, we're adding a second. Am I understanding correctly?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Other questions? I think this can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Item 8, items recommended for approval on March 22nd, 2021. Shall I read them all, Mr. President?
Yeah, please.
Thank you. A, recommended board approval for the elimination of the following positions effective in the 2021-22 school year. 1, Executive Administrative Assistant to the Superintendent. 2, Director of Human Resources. 3, 2 elementary physical education teachers. 4, 1 elementary librarian. Section B, recommended board approval for the creation and job description, where applicable, of the following positions effective in the 2021-22 school year. 1, Coordinator of Communications and Administrative Services. 2, Assistant Director of Pupil Personnel. 3, Elementary Reading Specialist. 4, elementary English language instructor. 5, 4 part-time 5-hour library paraprofessionals. 6, increased math support paraprofessional at Indian Rock Elementary from 3.75 hours to 7 hours. 7, increased math support paraprofessional at East York Elementary from 3.75 hours to 7 hours. C, recommended board approval of the elimination of the administrative assistant position. This position is combined with the coordinator of child accounting transportation. D, recommended board approval of the approval and implementation of clinical advantage, low clinical value, and voluntary SMART 90 maintenance programs to the prescription plan effective July 1, 2021. And I ain't gonna repeat it.
So is the administration going to give an overview of this before the vote, the rationale behind it?
John, isn't this for March 22nd?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And this list has the potential to change going forward as well. But that's the current thinking as of this morning.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? That concludes my report.
Thank you. Mr. Toman.
Policy Review Committee report. We have a long list of policies that I'm not going to read that were discussed at the January 25th committee meeting and recommended out of committee first read by the board at the February 8th and 22nd meetings. We had second read at this meeting and anticipated adoption at the March 22nd meeting. Are there any questions or concerns with any of these policies at this point?
Wow, you got off easy.
That is all I have.
Mr. Robinson, legislative update.
Thank you, Mr. Posnow. Well, as I've been saying ad nauseum for the past several meetings, March 22nd is Advocacy Day. If you've not signed up, please do so. To date, there are over 100 participants. The PSBA is hoping to have more than 200 by the 22nd so that we can approach our legislatures to talk about a variety of issues, chief of which will be a discussion of mandate waivers, vouchers, special education funding, and charter and cyber charter reform. In addition, Senate 73, a bill that is being proposed by Senator Langehoff on mandate waivers, I think is currently making its rounds in the Senate. And for anybody who is interested in charter or cyber charter reform, a subject near and dear to my heart, there is a website that you can consult, pacharterchange.org. It's a surefire cure for insomnia. That concludes my report.
Okay, thank you. While we're talking about legislative updates, I had the opportunity to meet with the president of West York School District and Carol Hill Evans. I guess that was last week. And she is on the educational committee in Harrisburg and was interested in feedback both on student performance, concerns about student well-being, problems the districts were having. I was quick to point out our generous amount of money that we get from the state is our cost per student, that we're the lowest in the county. We had an opportunity to discuss cyber schools and charter schools and the disproportionate amount of resources they get compared to us. So it was a good meeting. It lasted about an hour and a half. So I hijacked some of your meeting, Rich, for that. So some of your.
I'm glad you did. We just have to go to more of our friends in Harrisburg and make the same case. I don't think it'll be quite as easy.
Yeah, she is very sympathetic and understands the issues and the costs with, especially with charter schools. So we will see. Ms. Frerick.
Yes, the LIU, you have before you the Dawn's Early Light with the highlights from the board meeting of March 2nd, which always shows you a little snippet of what's going on out at the LIU. And they are, I understand from somebody I was in touch with today about something else, they're ramping up for the vaccine clinics that are going to be taking place out there at the LIU. The Joint Operating Authority, there's no specific report, but I saw in the paper that they are seeking bids for the construction of both of the health centers that I had mentioned to you previously that are going to be built out in New Oxford and at the York Learning Center for use by the LIU people to begin with. If there are no questions, York Adams Academy, you have before you the board brief report from our February 23rd meeting. And in the interim, our director, Chris Foltz, has resigned to accept another position, and we have begun the search for a new director. So I will keep you posted. And that concludes my reports.
Okay, thank you. York Adams Tax Bureau, Ms. Chichuli.
No report.
Thank you. York County School Technology, Ms. Schrader.
Yes, I had opportunity last week to tour the almost completed new gymnasium that's under construction at the School of Technology, and it's going to be a very nice facility. The hope is that the county will use it as well, primarily its location, thinking in terms of league playoff games and that kind of thing. So it's going to be an asset to the community for sure. And the only other thing I wanted to mention for members of the public or perhaps board members to make everyone aware that the adult education program at the School of Technology, that veterans benefits are recognized there, so that any veteran who has benefits to use in education could be applied at the School of Technology in the adult education program. If there are no questions, that concludes my report.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everybody that sat through the meeting with us tonight online. We really appreciate your involvement. You have a link here for the board meeting schedule. And do we have any more public comment?
We do not.
Okay. Then if there's nothing else, I think we're adjourned.